Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for August 18th, 2023. I'm Benji Fisher, moderating and sharing my screen. Also present are Ralph Kohler, Aaron McHale, Quinn Pham, and Thomas Howell. And we're going to start with a continuation of the discussion from last week. So this is issue 2546212, entity view/form mode, formatter/widget settings have no translation UI. So just for context, I have an Umami site here set up. If anyone else wants to play with this site, I'll paste the link into the Zoom chat. So can you tell me how to see this problem?
If you go to content type and manage fields, for example, article content type. Yeah, just create quickly a Boolean field.
Ralph, I need some guidance here.
Sorry, just create it.
Okay.
Sorry, apologies. Then go to manage display. And then go to the Boolean field. Yep, and go to the edit. And switch the output format to custom. And enter something.
I would suggest yes, yes, true, and no, no,
Yes.
false.
Okay. Probably the punctuation isn't helpful. Whoops. Okay.
And save. And then go to the configuration translation page, please.
So that's a totally different part of the site.
Yeah, configuration, then region and language, and then configuration translation. And then go to, what's the name? Content view display.
This is alphabetical.
Yep, and it's missing. So probably the patch would add it.
Okay, but the claim is that without the patch, there's no way to translate that.
Yeah, exactly. If you go to and the gist of the problem, if you go to the issue for that, I've linked, and go to comment number 221.
Oof.
There's a screenshot.
Okay, so again, this is a continuation of the discussion from last week, so I won't try to go through the whole thing, just the update part.
And as you can see on the manage display page, you have the custom output for true and custom output for false. And on the translation, the order is switched. False is first and true is second. And Thomas pointed out last week as an example for legal documents, for example, which are where often a Boolean field is used with confirm or agree to something, that could be problematic if the person isn't really reading or just taking a glimpse.
And it's more, I continue to have the bigger concern that we don't know why. We just know that the developer who's been working on the code said that they're unable to get the order, so that they can't control for it. And that would mean that we could potentially have much more complex custom field or contrib module fields or custom module fields that have very unexpected ordering. And especially for someone who's already using the translation, coming over here, they may not notice that false and true are inverted, and it could lead to a lot of problems. And but my clarification today is I don't believe that the issue is to fix this problem. I think that we need to set what the pattern should be and then make a recommendation on how that should be moving forward. So the recommendation is the pattern should remain the same. And then you could, if you wanted, open an issue to have Boolean fixed once we knew why Boolean was failing. So for this issue, it's not the developer's responsibility to fix Boolean, but maybe there's something wrong with Boolean or something that needs to change with Boolean to make it like URL or list, which are capable of keeping the correct order.
Record. Okay, shall we move on to another issue?
Sure.
Yep.
Are there anything on the list that Aaron's been tracking that people would like to talk about or prepared to talk about? Ralph, go ahead.
Or Aaron or Thomas wanted to say something first, then go ahead.
No, I was just going to make a joke.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to suggest to take a look at the add field we've already seen on your installation, Benji. I've added it last week to the list. It has not a issue number, but while testing the issue we've talked about today, I noticed that add field issue went in, and I've noticed a few points that might be discuss worthy.
Oh,
Manage fields and create a new field. Yep. Exactly.
yeah, I was a little surprised to see this.
Yep, me too. And I've already made a list of points I've noticed, and I could quickly go through that, and then we could discuss if one of you noticed something else. And yeah. Okay.
So we don't have a particular issue to talk about here, or do we? This would be a follow-up of something that's obviously already been committed.
Yeah, that would be a follow-up to the issue that committed that add field, the new
Okay.
And I'm not sure if I would create a single issue in case there's an agreement, or if it would be better to create several smaller ones.
Okay. So while we talk about this, maybe someone in the background can find the issue that changed this, and then we can at least have that as reference in the notes. But for now, go ahead, Ralph. What have you noticed about this?
Okay. First is most of the descriptions start with field. The overall context is field, and the term field is the most important information in the description to start with. And the microcopy could be improved in general there, meaning field to store an email, field to reference other content, text field that does not support markup, and so forth. Those strings might be improved somehow, is my impression. And visually, it's rather challenging to distinguish between the title and the description, and it is also hard to find the visual anchor for what the type of field for the card is. For me, it's challenging, meaning the field type, for example, plain text, formatted text, number, reference, might be bold, for example, to bring in some sort of structure and highlight the more important detail. Choose an option below is shown after the list is available. If we, for example, let's please click into plain text, for example. And then the choose an option is shown after the list of available fields. Visually, you have to jump from, for example, the plain text down to the list of available options, and visually I jump in between those. And if you narrow the browser width to make it mobile first, basically.
I was wondering what it would look like on a mobile device. So
It's
first of
problematic.
all,
It's way beneath the fold, and you wouldn't notice necessarily that something new showed up. And it brings also another detail in for screen reader users. I've tested with VoiceOver, and if you, for example, select the plain text, then it isn't announced at all that there are two available options. And that's also problematic from my point of view. And if you take a look there, the visual structure text, the text plane and those bullet point outlines are identical font weight and identical font size. So it's even more difficult to distinguish visually. Drupal announce Python. Oh, and another detail in regards to screen readers, for the field types like link, email, those descriptions are announced automatically. But for those options, you just hear text, plain, and the other option. So the bullet points are could be missed. Let's put it that way. And from could you move again back to the desktop view, please? Okay, I'll quickly share my screen. Desktop 2, share. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, and Benji is back.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, it's working.
Okay, good. But before you go any further, Thomas, I'd like to give people a chance to respond to the points you've already made.
Okay.
So do other people have problem distinguishing between labels and descriptions? Do we think we need to make that a clear distinction there?
I cannot think of anything about a label, but input on the field, like Ralph said, field is just below the fold, and then for me, the fields should be grouped together for better UX. It's making it easier for user to follow. So
So what do you think should be grouped together? Is it the items in that 3x4 grid that you'd like to see grouped somehow?
yes, that's what I mean.
Any other comments?
I think I agree with Ralph, but I'm trying to figure out. I'm struggling to think of how it should look. I feel that the biggest issue for me was the below the fold of where the options appear. I think that is a big problem. I think it needs to appear above uh, what you've selected, so or between what you've selected and shifting all the things you have not selected down. And there may be problems with that behavior, but I think that is particularly problematic. I'm concerned about the accessibility issues that were brought up as well. When it comes specifically to the title of the field, I'm not sure if bold is the best solution. I really want to make certain that Aaron or someone with more accessibility experience could speak to that. To me, I always want things to be plain text : this field does not support markup or something like. My changes are probably not as visually appealing. It's just what I've seen in a lot of resumes lately, where to me that's the approach that seems to work. I'm also wondering what happens when there's a significant number of contrib fields. Like what happens when things start getting added in to the list. I think it would exacerbate the problems that have been pointed out.
Yeah, I wonder what the API changes are for this when a contrib module or a custom module wants to provide another field. Any other comments? My thoughts are that first of all, the question of grouping goes together with the question of the placement of the options. And it seems that it would be hard to change one without changing the other. You can't get the options to be close to the selected item without radically updating this layout. On the other hand, I think the below the fold problem is not such a big problem, because once you make a selection from the options list, but this basically is an options list, even though it's formatted as a table. Once you make a selection, you're going to have to save the form. And as you scroll down to find the save button, you will naturally find the additional options here. Go ahead, Aaron.
I have an idea that may address some of those concerns because yeah, I kind of can appreciate everybody's points, to be honest. But what if instead of when you selected one, it used like an Ajax callback to reload that part of the page and then, you know, displayed the second set of options with the option to like go back and change your selection? Because that would also be better for potentially on a mobile type view, where if you think you have a list of fields and then you tap on one and then the list goes away and then you're just left with the next set of options to pick from. The other thing I would say is in using this so far, and again, it's very new, very limited amount of experience using it, but I found myself missing the label field because I think it's visually overshadowed by the giant grid. That's what I'm drawn to. So I completely forget about the label. So and because of the flow here, I think it makes more sense to have the label as the last thing that you do, because you're coming here, you're thinking about, okay, what field type do I want? What form do I want? And then once you've picked that, then you might think, okay, what am I calling this, right? So that might be a better order of operations here, and you know, using a multi-step flow here rather than everything being on the one page might be a better way of approaching this.
Sort of a wizard multi-step form approach, or put it in modal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I guess the next steps after this page are already a multi-step form as you pick settings for the field you've selected. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just one addition to Aaron's comment. Fun fact, when I was testing that, I always forgot to add the label. As always, I pick that and let's say, and I always get the error message, I have to fill out the label. I was each and every time, even after I knew it for the first time, I always ran that error and I forgot because I was drawn pressing one of those buttons and then choosing an option and proceed. And
yeah, that's exactly what I was doing as well.
Yeah, exactly. And just one, I've participated in the user tests, and back then both the add field and reuse field were both overlays, and that way you had basically a wizard. And that is also one of the points I made now. It's going back a bit now. If you just make test, text format, you get again unconnected single pages, and you as a user are uncertain where you actually are and what is happening, how many steps are still left, and it's a bit disconnected from my perspective. Now you have save field settings before you have save and continue, and it's suboptimal.
Okay, go ahead, Thomas. Thomas, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. Looking through everything, it kind of touches on both what you said and what Quinn said. First, I seem to recall in older versions of Drupal, I don't know when it changed. It may be just before this iteration, but there were groupings of things that were numerical, for instance, versus non-numerical. But one of the biggest challenges I've had in the past is if you're not intimately familiar with all of these field types and you're searching for the right field type that you want to use, this approach doesn't really, it tells you a lot about everything, but especially on mobile, but in any instance, when you pick something, you're going to have to scroll down to the bottom to see what the options are or what it looks like. And that kind of information makes it hard to preview what does plain text look like, what does number look like, what does reference look like. And I get that this isn't quite that, but the fact that they aren't grouped in any way that makes it clear what is one type versus what is another, and we could add in contrib modules, it to me makes it very challenging for any larger or more complex website. So for simple websites, it's not an issue. So I continue to worry about pushing everything to the bottom, because then you're going to scroll to the bottom, scroll to the top, scroll to the bottom, scroll to the top. And I concur about label needing to be at least farther down this page. And I don't know if it has to be modal or wizard, but because I think you could change it within the page. I don't know if that's a bad pattern. So I'm not sure about the how. But I just, there is something off about how this works. It feels complex and confusing.
And one in regards of using it, one other detail that is probably at least confusing for me. If you use it with a screen reader, it's kind of okay. You're able to here. I press tab key. Oops, I just reload. Oh no. Manage fields again, create a new field. Okay, I'm here, I press the tab key, I get there and get the announcement, and I realize, okay, we are basically in radio buttons. So I navigate now with the cursors right or down, or up, that way. But point is, as a sighted user, it's not very clear to me, at least visually, that if I tap here, now I get down here, and now I get to save. And if I go shift space, I get to the end of each of the lists. And I have different expectations as a sighted user there, trying to use it with the keyboard. My expectation would have been I'm also able to tap through it, but yeah, it's radio buttons, but those cards don't look like the usual radio button list.
I think this is for example where we have to be careful when we use like these progressive disclosure patterns, because you kind of demonstrated there a slight problem with this, where if you tab to this list and you start just like using are you just using the arrow keys to navigate up and down essentially?
Inside the cards I use the arrow key that way, yeah.
And we can see like the next part, the sort of the second set of options changes. And are you saying that it's not clear? To me, it seems like it's maybe not clear to a user who's just navigating the keyboard, using a screen reader, let's say, who doesn't have that visual information, that there is these other options appearing below. And it seems like that's the case. So that's why I'm going back, even with this, I'm going back to the idea that putting it, making these even just links that do an Ajax callback, because then you can find the one you want, it's that one, and then you can, if it's a button or a link or whatever it is, there's a clear indication to the user that, okay, when I interact with this, I'm going to go to the next step, or something is going to happen. Whereas with this, it's a little bit maybe less clear that as you're tabbing along, you're expected to find the one that you want and then navigate to the next section. So yeah, and I also kind of like the idea of putting it in a model, as you said. Like, I think this would be a good candidate. We're already putting more things in models. Like, for instance, I believe now all delete forms for entity delete forms are in models. So in addition, putting this in a model, I think is a good idea, and that would potentially better support the like multi-step flow that I think would be more usable and accessible for this.
I could. Do you hear me right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I just unplugged my earplugs. Just wanted to demonstrate quickly, if possible, how the page is announced in VoiceOver. Let's test it.
VoiceOver on Safari. Add field vertical line Drupal window. Add field vertical line Drupal web content as keyboard focus.
Do you hear it?
You are currently on content. To enter the web area,
Okay.
press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow. Label edit text. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type. Plain text, radio button, 1 of 12. Formatted text, selected, radio button, 2 of 12. Text field with markup support and optional editor. You are currently on a selected radio button, 2 of 12. Number, selected, radio button, 3 of 12. Field to store number, that is it, price, or quantity. You are currently on a selected radio button, 3 of 12. Number, selected, radio button, 3 of 12. VoiceOver off.
Second. As you were able to see, those options aren't announced, and oh, I forgot one detail.
VoiceOver on Safari. Add field vertical line Drupal with number, decimal, selected, radio button, 1 of 3. You are currently on a selected radio button, 1 of 3.
And we don't get any of the bulleted list.
Selected, radio, VoiceOver off.
As you can see, oops. Or here, those bullet points weren't announced, and there was no indication that there are. And if you take it in comparison to, for example, the references, there isn't any description underneath. And that way, to distinguish between that as a screen reader user, it's challenging.
Okay, I'd like to wrap up discussion on this issue. I did find the issue that introduced this, and I pasted a link into the Zoom chat. Yeah, somehow it was committed on June 30th, and I didn't notice until today. I don't know how that happened. That's obviously my inattention. But I also noticed that it has the usability issue tag, but it doesn't, and never did have the tag for usability review, nor an accessibility review. So I think we need to make a little noise and point out that Drupal does have core gates and that we should be consulted on an issue like this before it gets merged. I think it's I think we should have had a chance to have this discussion before the issue was committed rather than after. So maybe I will reach out to Lowry on Slack as in his role as product manager, and I assume he was also involved in this issue.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And as for oh yeah, there is one child issue that I see, which is to improve the field, is to refine the field descriptions. So probably some of the comments we've made could be added there. Yeah, I think that striking the word field from all of the descriptions is actually a good start. But yeah, feel free to comment on that issue. There is also a parent issue. So it's possible that there are sibling issues without direct links to the one I'm looking at. Although looking at its child issues, I don't see any. And yeah, the last comment I want to make now that I found this issue is that in comment 53, which I found just by searching for the word usability on the page, Roy Schulten already brought up the point that it's really easy to miss the label field. So that was brought up some time ago, and we observed the same thing. So it's sort of a failure of the process that we still have that usability problem. I do see some further discussion after 53. So maybe I'm being a little premature in complaining about that without reading the rest of the discussion. Any other next steps we should take on this?
Do we have a summary of, I don't know if anyone was, I don't know who's taking an action to summarize kind of that discussion, or?
Right, and where should that discussion go? The issue is I had trouble finding the issue because it's not marked fixed, it's marked closed fixed because it was some time ago. Where should we make these follow-ups? Maybe maybe we should create a new issue on the parent issue. And identify it as a follow-up to this one, and tag it for usability, and try to put the discussion there. Does that sound like the right place to put it?
Yeah.
So any volunteers to create that issue?
But a single issue with all those points, I'm not sure if it would be easier actionable if you make smaller issues with a clearer scope.
Okay, well, would you be willing to create multiple issues?
Yeah, I already made a few notes during the meeting, and I also have the ones I've created up front, and maybe I could summarize those points when you post the recording to today's meeting. I could quickly rewatch and add ones I forgot, and then we could forward maybe that document to Laurie at first, and then they can decide what the best process is, because those folks are working on the field in general, so on the field UI at the moment.
Yeah,
so
I think this is like a funded thing that Acquia are funding, so
yeah.
It might be quite this is one of those things that probably is going to move quite quickly, so we might want to, as you said, like directly consult with those involved in it first. I do wonder if actually if and I don't know if we got consensus on it, but just let's say if we agree that like a multi-step flow and potential data model is a good idea, then that would I think that would be the first step, because then once that's done, we could then say, okay, that does involve changing, kind of addressing quite a few of those things, like around the use of radio buttons and other things. So Yeah, maybe we need to be careful about the order of which that these things are tackled.
Maybe we can start by making comments on the parent issue, the plan issue. Here, let me just briefly share my screen.
You mean on the improved field creation experience issue?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm now looking at issue 3346539. And it's a plan issue, improve field creation experience. One of its children is 3356894, make field selection less overwhelming by introducing groups. That's the issue that made these large changes. So I think I will add a comment to this plan issue, and the rest feel free to chime in with anything I've missed. And that might be the most convenient way forward. We can create more focused issues later, but let's quickly get our concerns recorded somewhere visible.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we move on and spend the last 10 minutes talking about Drupalisms as Christina requested? Or any last comments on this field creation before we go? Getting a thumbs up from Ralph. Okay, let me see. So Christina created a stub issue. It's issue 3381734. Thanks, Ralph, for posting that in Zoom chat. Locate Drupalisms that might create confusion among users. And that, as it stands, that title is very, very broad. I think the intention is to limit it to the administration menu. So
I think that's the context, was the administration menu, but I would acknowledge that I don't know of a definitive list of things that are considered Drupalisms anywhere. So the starting place would be with the admin menu for this discussion.
right. Other, I seem to be on my DDEV site, not my shared site. So where is a good place to start?
I've posted in the chat display modes with view and form modes.
Okay, that is certainly a Drupalism, so that would be under structure, display modes.
That's something another CMS doesn't have in that form.
Oh,
and go ahead.
One of the things that we had talked about was possibly trying to figure out ways of using Ralph's work to identify words that didn't appear in the menus of other non-Drupal sites. So that might be, we were talking about how could we find things that were different. It's a methodology.
Oh, bother. I'm sorry. There is a link on the issue for the comparison Ralph put together, but it's a Slack link. Grr. Those are inconvenient. I think if we could get a link to the Google Doc on,
yeah,
on this
I'm
page.
looking it up. 1 second.
Thank you.
Second. I have two. Which is it?
I think there's a balance to be found here between things that are common, common functionality across CMSs, like when you want to add a page, how do we describe that in a way that people understand? But then there's things that Drupal does that not many other CMSs do, or the things that Drupal does in a way that like is different. And on the other hand, we want to find a way to describe those things, and like form and display and view modes might be an example of that. We want to find a way to like describe that in a way that is like doesn't confuse people either, because if that's a very specific thing that Drupal does in a way that Drupal does it, a Drupalism, so to speak, might actually be fine, because we don't want to maybe cause confusion between other CMSs, people assuming that, oh, because it's done that way in this CMS, Drupal does it this way, or even having a Drupalism may be okay because people are, maybe they read the documentation and they understand that, again, if it's like a specific thing. I think where we need to look at Drupalisms is where there's very strong areas of commonality in terms of like content creation, media creation, that kind of thing across CMSs. So I think there's a balance, and I don't think we need to strive for like 100% no Drupalisms. I don't think would be a realistic goal.
To be clear, the goal is not to eliminate Drupalisms. It came up in the context of a card sort. And the issue is content creators performing the card sort may not know the definition or understand the context of Drupalisms. So we don't have a definitive list of what is considered a Drupalism. So this particular task is just coming up with a list of what are the Drupalisms, so that then we can decide what to do about them. And we're not going to get rid of content type. You don't have to change content type. We don't need a new word for content type. It's more just knowing, okay, because historically when I see vocabularies and definitions and descriptions of terms, you might see content type next to article or account. And Drupalisms, it would be helpful to be able to give people context for when they do a card sort or when we're talking about things. Just being able to address those things. So the point of this issue is just identifying Drupalisms, not changing, altering, or fixing Drupalisms.
Right.
I agree.
And I think I almost want to say that's like a noble goal, and many have gone before us, but that sounds a bit too out there. Sorry, Ralph, you have your hand up.
No worries. The only thing I would suggest, I also agree, to get a situational awareness about the current state is definitely good. But in the end, I would basically just test with actual users at the end with a few exercises and see what works. And you also could test with, for example, Drupal users, experienced ones, beginner users in Drupal, as well as users from other CMSs. That would be also interesting if they would be able to navigate and find their initial way. And that brings me back to the tour module. That would be still, in my opinion, a very helpful tool to give a high-level introduction on certain pages about the different concepts. So it is good to align to a certain degree to other CMSs, but still to keep your own characteristics and your own voice and tone. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
And
I just want to be clear, it's not about changing things. Like, we're not talking about changing anything.
So I'm mindful that we're running up against the hour, but I wonder if anybody has answered the question of how do we know we have a Drupalism? Like, do we have to compare everything against every CMS? Like, what qualifies something as a Drupalism? I guess is the kind of like, I suppose it's one of the questions. I don't know if we have a concrete like set of guide rails there to say this is a Drupalism, this isn't a Drupalism.
I think it'll help to get people who do have experience with Drupal and with other CMSs.
And all of my experience is anecdotal. It's from when I worked in support, dealing with customers or other support engineers who didn't know something when they first came because they're like, what is this? And we saw a lot of it when we went from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. And because I remember there was a strong drive to make it more PHP developer friendly so that non-Drupalists could enter the island. And so for me, it's just trying to come up with a list, and it doesn't have to be exhaustive, and it doesn't have to be something that we want to take any action on, but it's so that you can actually understand how that could be impacting a card sort. And we don't have, I don't think there's any significant amount of resources being poured into this. It was just a question that came up because we're trying to determine how to organize. That's what the card sort exercise is, how to organize the admin menu. And for me, one of the big examples is taxonomy. When I use taxonomy with business folk, they have no idea what I'm talking about. When I say vocabulary, they know what I'm talking about. So if you have a card sort on a menu, and it's an administrative menu for a content generator or a content editor, and the term taxonomy is there, that will have different meaning, and it ends up in a more confused space because people don't necessarily have context to what that term means for the exercise. Same
Hello,
thing.
can you hear me now?
Oh, hear you, yes.
Okay, good. I had to drop and rejoin again. It is a little bit after the hour. Just looking at the meeting chat, Quinn had a couple of suggestion nodes. That is certainly a Drupalism. And I think Quinn also suggested instead of content type, saying type of content. But I think that Thomas is right, that the scope of this current issue is to identify the Drupalisms, not necessarily come up with replacements. And go ahead.
I would just say that I think we do a good job of like not saying node in the UI, and I think we've made a lot of efforts to purge it from the UI. But I'm sure there's examples of it creeping in somewhere, and probably in more advanced areas like on views and in other places. But I don't think we'll ever get rid of, unless we fundamentally rename the entire node module. I don't think we'll ever get rid of nodes entirely as a term. And
Ralph gives us the link to abbeycovert.com/writing/information-architecture-for-navigation. So that's probably worth reading, but let's wrap up. I again won't be here next week. Aaron will be running the meeting. And I think that we should just try to leave some comments on the issues we've discussed, and continue the good work. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.